All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today at Inside the Boldest Nation-State Attack in History, our session to discuss the Nobelium incident, which Microsoft disclosed in December of 2020. We're going to discuss a variety of different topics with some of the best and most experienced global security experts around and have a conversation and share some of the insights from these folks who were there on the ground in responding to this attack. So first up, if folks want to go around and introduce themselves, that would be great. Elia, do you want to go first?
I'm Elia Florio. Been working at Microsoft for over 10 years. I'm been on the front line of responding to global threats and incidents similar to Nobelium. And I'm a principal security research lead working for Microsoft 365 Defender product.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Dana Baril. I am senior security research manager for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. I've been with Microsoft for over 6 years.
I'm Raymond Nafisi. I am a malware reverse engineer with Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, Mystic, where I primarily focus on analysis, detection, mitigation of advanced nation-state sponsored attacks.
For those who are maybe less familiar with the details of the Nobelium attack, you were really involved, I'm sure throughout, but really hands-on involved in the very beginning. And I was wondering if you could take us through kind of briefly, what was that initial intrusion about? Can you walk us through a couple of the details?
An actor we track as Nobelium, under the name Nobelium, managed to gain access to a software build server that's used by SolarWinds to compile an IT monitoring platform named Orion, or formerly known as Orion. After gaining an understanding of the build process, the attacker first managed to sneak in a small snippet of innocuous code into one of the Orion's library files. The goal was to see if the modified library file bearing the unauthorized code would, one, make it pass all the SolarWinds code review and release processes, and two, would make it to the systems of the Orion customers via the usual update process. This was essentially their first attempt at pulling off a supply chain attack, and they were successful at it. So a few months later, this attacker Nobelium came back with a snippet of code that this time was a advanced and fully capable backdoor that was essentially introduced into the same build process. The attacker this time leveraged a tool dubbed Sunspot by CrowdStrike to introduce the backdoor code into the one of the update packages of Orion. The Sunspot tool that used by the attacker would basically monitor the build and compilation related processes on the build server, and just at the right time, it would replace one of the source code files with a source code file, an identical source code file that this time contained the backdoor code introduced by the actor.
Once they were able to insert their code into the source code and through the update process, get out to all of the customers who are updating, this was a way of bypassing quite a few levels of security and entering into the heart of the network. Dana, are you familiar with kind of their strategy once they were able to do that and spread out to this wider base?
Yeah, so I should definitely mention that it was the perfect choice of the software for supply chain attack, in my opinion. This software is widely installed. It is used by high-profile customers. Traditionally, the SolarWinds Orion servers do not run defenses. the software by design runs intrusive commands, so it was really hard to detect and identify that something unusual is going on.
The attacker has already been operating for over a year. Now, when the defender came in, we were just basically at the end of this period and we found the backdoor. So, responding to this incident put the defender in a very unfair, disadvantaged position. And the second thing, to connect with what Dana was saying about supply chain. So, supply chain are not in use in the security industry. We have plenty of examples, but in this case, the sophistication of how long they study and then they prepared, the supply chain with the very sophisticated, accurate testing. They were so accurate. They were able to insert the code without modifying the source code, which will be something that is very easy to spot and to be detected. So that was very, very unique. And also in this supply chain, the adversary was basically carefully finding a way. When they arrived on the box, they wanted to try to avoid being detected. So in case their backdoor will actually get detected, they were trying to disconnect the execution of the commands from the supply chain, because they knew that having such a supply chain, it's a unique value point and a unique gain point for the attacker. So, as a defender and a forensic analyst, you got to try to understand what happened. Even the best security analysts in the world and companies like Microsoft and FireEye, it took a lot of time, a lot of human power and analyst power to reverse analyze and understanding where, finding the attack is one thing, but finding the entry point. So what is the first unique instance of the attack, which is basically SolarWinds, that one really take, a lot of, work, a lot of effort, skills, some luck as well, but that was basically the unique piece of the supply chain.
My understanding is that there was this incredible amount of variation of tactics, techniques per victim. It was really adapted to the unique environment and security and infrastructure of each victim. Every IP address was different, even if they came back in 20 minutes later via new IP address, hashes, kind of on and on, domains, on and on. And I've heard estimated that, kind of a ballpark figure of probably around 1,000 attackers were involved, in organized fashion. And so when you're taking this long, slow, and low approach, I think it calls a question a little bit. What is the adversarial mindset? What is this strategy that they're doing, and why are they doing this? Why are they investing so much?
Absolutely. So the actor employed what we call counterintelligence. So they made sure that the intelligence that was developed by the TI community, by security vendors, it has some type of degraded value when it comes to investigating this intrusion. The actor made sure that, as Michael mentioned, the actor made sure that the indicators that we use, indicators of attack that we usually use during the investigation of intrusions like this, they made sure that these indicators are unique to each victim, which meant that we actually had to rely on more traditional and expensive techniques. So this was arguably one of the more advanced espionage campaign that we've seen. The goal was obviously to collect intelligence from some of the organizations that they had in mind that they found interesting. They had collection requirements, so their job was to go after these organizations and collect the information that they had in mind using all these sophisticated techniques that they had in their arsenal to be able to accomplish their goal.
And I was wondering if any of you have thoughts on speculating. What do you think was going on behind the scenes for them?
We're just speculating, but the way this attacker was operating, first of all, it's clearly well-funded. They have I would say, a huge budget, like a really large budget, both in terms of economical budget or budget, human budget in terms of operators. So really, this operation is run as a main project where you can imagine there are some project manager that they know the entire vision, but all these departments, they don't really talk to each other. So most likely, once the initial access to SolarWinds was obtained, they must have given passing the ball to the next department, which we can now imagine this new organization be like, hey, let's take now our backdoor expert.
One of one of the things we noticed while investigating this intrusion was the actual the organization of the organizational chart of this attacker. You could see based on the different level of sophistication that was employed. We can see that just like any professional computer network exploitation or attack shop, you can see that there is the initial access team, as Elia mentioned, they're responsible for gaining access to an environment. And then that's when the post-exploitation team comes in. They may not necessarily share the same level of sophistication, but they work very closely to enable access to an environment and then carry out their post-exploitation objectives. So that was one of the things that stood out to us as we were investigating, as we came across different artifacts, different operational security that was employed, the operational security level that was employed by these actors, the backdoor that was used, the initial backdoor versus some of the custom backdoors and tooling that was developed most likely by different groups within the same organization. So it was interesting to see how these teams work together, their development team, their initial access team, their post-exploitation team, the team responsible for, most likely responsible for planning and executing this attack.
They monitored and tracked this attack carefully and were really hands-on and kind of like on track on every machine involved, every step involved. And it was not the kind of attacks that kind of just ship the malware and disappear, but more of a hands-on attack, closely monitored by the attackers.
And I wonder, moving on into more into the attack, what aspects of this attack do you actually think were novel, were new, are worth paying attention to as trends?
The combination of a nation-state attacker running a supply chain attack, targeting cloud assets is the unique part of this attack, in my opinion. The scale of this supply chain attack, of course, is wide. The targets are unique as well.
You're right on spot. I mean, many of these things were taken individually. They were not truly novel. And these attackers able to really master the old school and the new school at the same time, combine them to get the maximum gain from both things combined together.
The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, was about the fact that this was a multi-pronged operation. So again, it wasn't just about malware. It was about doing their homework to ensure that once they are detected, then they have a plan B and C and D to be able to continue to operate within the network and collect the information and the intelligence that they need before they have to leave the network, or they have to basically terminate their operation inside the network. The way we saw it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the big lessons for customers from what you're both raising right now is that you need breadth of data. You need to have across as many relevant sensors and vectors as possible, endpoint, cloud, on-prem, identity, and you need to have as much historical data as you reasonably can, because actors at the nation state level and potentially over time, criminal actors will learn to be more patient and take longer time. And so you need to be prepared. And I wonder, we've had some real breakthroughs discovering this very complex malware in SolarWinds, discovering some unique attack strategies like the Golden SAML attack. We've had some real lessons in this. And so I wondered if we could discuss some of the things that we really recommend customers think about, how to best protect themselves, how to be best ready to respond, if and when the next nation state attack occurs and impacts them.
I feel like we have two things to consider here. First of all, how to avoid a supply chain attack on your software. And the second is, of course, how can you protect your org against a supply chain attack? So when it comes to protecting your own software, I think it's important to think again about how developers should consider using more software constraints, more security awareness in their code. So it will be harder to exploit their code and will be harder to use their code for supply chain attacks. It's of course important as a software to protect your build system environment. It is a target. That's another reminder for us that it is a target for supply chain attacks, and we should definitely protect that as software companies. When it comes to actual customers protecting their network against attacks, I think this case reminds us how important it is to manage your network, to manage the access to your network, to manage your users, make sure who is an admin, who is not, have cloud awareness, be aware that endpoint attacks can end up with cloud compromise. This is something we didn't see before and didn't consider before as defenders.
So something to highlight here is the importance of information sharing. When we responded to this intrusion, we worked with many capable partners in the community to be able to track this actor and to be able to respond and mitigate some of the intrusion activities that we were seeing. So information sharing, as we all know, is the holy grail for defenders.
I think that one thing I've heard from many people who are involved is also don't forget the basic hygiene. Don't get distracted with all the innovation, all the advanced attacks. This attacker was focused on efficiency, and the more you can do around basic patching, vulnerability management, getting those basics right, making it harder for them to break in, making it more expensive. Those are really important. They're looking for the most efficient strategies. And one of the reasons why supply chain has become such an effective approach is because you can hack, one company to get access to thousands. And so as a community, we all need to do what we can to make this as inefficient and as difficult as possible.
Yeah, I can add a couple more thoughts about so yes, Dana made an incredible point about supply chain is really the hot topic. I guess probably we'll be facing more supply chain, and this is going to be one of these topic recurring over. And one thing to remember also, it's not just about software. So SolarWinds supply chain was really a software case. We just Microsoft just like a month ago. We also I think it was just like last month. We just published another Nobelium campaign, where in that case the access vector was a human supply chain. It was a contractor, a credential, or identity that was abused. Yeah, just be prepared. Try to run simulation, red team response, like with supply chain involved, and see if all your environment in terms of detection, monitoring, and logging and storage is able basically to catch these attacks, and eventually then able to allow your team to investigate, hunt. A couple of more topics also on the identity piece. Most of the guidance that our identity team released during the SolarWinds, they're available in a blog, and there's a huge quantity of both the white paper or really recommendation. I would just say go read them one by one and try to implement them in practice. There's a lot of good advice for our identity team in the way how you can configure not just two-factor authentication, but even multi-factor authentication, where you end up having both, like eventually your phone and a device, right? So it's a multi combination. The way how you treat and manage your ADFS server as a tier 0 device, that should be really put in a special category. If you cannot go and migrate to a zero trust network type of configuration where everything is untrusted, try to segment your network as much as possible. I can tell you that in many cases where Nobelium was having a hard time to break through, and it was because the network was very well segmented. So in order to jump or move laterally now, you have to do more things, or eventually you have to try to compromise a workstation that actually require an additional smart card or something like that. So this type of segmentation, where you put your most critical asset under a different place, actually really, it can slow down the attacker or make the attacker commit mistakes, right? So these are all, I think, in general, good recommendations that we should follow as an industry, but also for the customer to be prepared.
That's great. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you all for the incredible work you do. And I also want to thank all the defenders who are watching this as well for the work they do. This is a community effort. Thank you. And it's really inspiring to work with you all and know that we're part of this larger security community at Black Hat and beyond. The work continues. And thank you all so much for watching us today. And hopefully next time we'll get to do this in person.